Hello and welcome to the Women in Cleantech and Sustainability Professional Development Workshop, a seat at the table, how to start your corporate board journey. I'm very excited to talk about this important topic today, and we're lucky to have Julie Castro Abrams as our presenter. My name is Pam Samarco. I'm the CEO and founder of Green Training Associates, LLC, a full-service professional development workshop and career talent solutions company, and I'm also the career development board officer for WCS. I'll be your moderator today, and I'd like to thank you for choosing to spend 2 hours of your beautiful summer afternoon to attend this professional development workshop. We are doing skill building programs for you today, and this is essential to learn about how to get that corporate board journey started. We'll start with some quick housekeeping items. Next slide, please. And we'll have a word from our sponsor. This is our corporate sponsor, Aurora Solar. So I'll be introducing them shortly to share with you their company. And we'll move on to a discussion with Julie, which will include 2 really important executive guests that are going to be interviewed on their board officer experience, Julie Bush and Vidisha Prasad. So we're excited to have some guests, and that's our fireside chat. We'll have another breakout activity, next steps, and close. So next slide, brief reminder. We all know pretty much how Zoom works. We'll remind you to type your full name into your profile so we see who you are. Turn your video on if you feel comfortable doing so, because we love to see your faces. And out of respect for our speaker, be sure to mute yourself during the presentation. This program is being recorded and will be made available to the registrants. And we also encourage you to drop your LinkedIn profile into the chat so you can connect with others and get actively involved. So feel free to type in the chat. We'll be taking questions throughout the program as well. Next slide, please. So who we are. The Women in Cleantech and Sustainability is a global organization. We're a group of influential women and men in this professional network to further the roles of women in the green economy and work toward developing impact for the environment. We have lots of great events, monthly events, professional development workshops such as this one, a mentorship program, an entrepreneur circle. We have a great iconic TED Talk style program in January, a conference that's in person in Sunnyvale, California, and we also are expanding into Europe. So this is an exciting time for WCS. We are supportive of all women and men that join this influential network. Next slide. So speaking of events, here are some upcoming events. We've got a fireside chat that's in person in Venice, California, a happy hour, various cities. You'll see those pop up because we are global and we're across 13 countries and 33 states, actually. So the good news is happy hours will be made available locally. And we'll have a workshop September 28th, how to talk about money at work. This is a skill building conversation not to be missed. And then a reverse pitch, which is an exciting time for supporters, investors, entrepreneurs, and funders. So that's our upcoming event slide. Please, next slide. Let me speak briefly about membership. Feel free to use this QR code to sign up if you're not currently a member for WCS today. You'll get reimbursed for today's event if you sign up today using the QR code. And feel free to reach out to me or any of the WCS board officers. If you have questions about membership, we're glad to support you. We're also going to invite you to contact me for corporate membership, which is a group membership, basically, that empower all of the women employees in your organization. It's essential that it's an all-in approach because you're educating, developing skills, empowering, and creating capability for every woman. So corporate membership, there's different levels. Feel free to drop me a direct message in the chat. And again, I'm glad to make sure that your needs are met and your priorities are achieved and that your women are successful and empowered. Next slide, please. So I am delighted to introduce Maria Paula Angarita. She's a sales engineering manager for Aurora Solar, and she is going to give us a couple of minutes update as one of our premier corporate sponsors. Maria Paula, take it away.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, so as Pam mentioned, my name is Maria Paula. Also, I go by MP. I am okay with that. It's nice to meet you all. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here to represent Aurora Solar. Aurora Solar is a San Francisco-based company, but we do have a remote first policy. So we have Aurorans all over the country. Our footprint is really large. I'm in Montana myself, which is kind of an interesting story, but for another time. We also have employees in Canada, and we actually just launched an initiative and our operations in Germany. So we're landing in Europe, really excited about that. At Aurora, our mission is to create a future of solar for all. And the way we do that is that our software platform has totally revolutionized the way people design, sell, market, and install solar installations, particularly for residential solar installations. The way we have the biggest impact is to reduce the soft costs of installation for solar and drive that clean and renewable energy future for all. We have over 7,000 of the industry's top organizations working with us. And actually last year, we announced that we finally hit the 10 million mark. So 10 million projects, residential projects, have been created through Aurora Solar software, which is really, really exciting. It's no secret that, women are traditionally underrepresented in tech, in leadership, in climate change, and solar. And so I'm really proud of the following statistics. So at Aurora Solar, 40% of the Aurora population are women, actually. And that's huge to me. I mean, it's one of the reasons I love working at Aurora Solar. Women are represented across all organizations, all functions, leadership levels. There's women in engineering. There's engineering leaders that are women. This acting CRO right now, Karina Brockle, is a woman. So I'm just thrilled to be representing Aurora today. And it's a community I'm really proud to be a part of. We really are invested in the success of women, success of people of all genders and backgrounds, in fact. And it's, not least of which is through programming like today's programming and in close partnership with women in clean tech and sustainability. So again, really proud, really happy to be here. If you all have any questions about Aurora Solar, I know I have some colleagues on this call. So hey, Alexis, Stephanie, I see y'all. I'll pass it back to you, Pam. Thank you.
Fantastic. Maria Paula, thank you, and welcome to you and to all of your Aurora Solar colleagues that are joining today. We're delighted to have you as a continued WCS corporate sponsor, and just stellar. 40% is extraordinary, and certainly our hats off to you for your organization to have women represented in that organization. So without further ado, let me transition to the next slide, please, and introduce today's presenter. We've all been waiting. We've been working on this for weeks, and it's finally here, where we have Julie Castro Abrams as the managing partner of How Women Invest and CEO of How Women Lead. She is the thought leader, and she is the expert around supporting you in developing your skills with practical tips and great stories, and a lot of data and information that's going to open your eyes, open your minds, and elevate you in the world of work and develop this career milestone opportunity. So Julie Castro Abrams is, and let me say a few words, is a gender and racial justice activist who has spent the majority of her career working to build great women-owned companies and economic access for women. She works with top executive women to change structures that are unequal. And she certainly has a leadership impact that includes changing laws on women on corporate boards, doing movement building to ensure women are putting board service on their path, and placing women on boards. So this is the heartbeat of why we're here today. And she's an expert on building boards that add a strategic advantage, including proactive searches for women on corporate boards. So Julie has a strong commitment to justice and community. She's well known in her personal and professional endeavors. She's widely recognized in many ways to connect with her ability to connect people and facilitate rich conversations that make change happen. Julie, we're so happy to have you here today. Welcome. And boy, I can't say enough about, I could go on for hours about your bio, but allow me to turn it to you because you're the star of the show and the audience is waiting and on the edge of their seats to hear from you. So I'm thanking you for your commitment to today and for your team to support today's event. Let me turn it to you for launching the program.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. You know, I did this last year and it was so fun. And what's also, of course, we have so many beautiful overlaps. So like Linda Kinney, she called me last week. She's like, "You're speaking at this event this group that I'm part of." And so I just want you to know, like literally you meet my bio. So I'm like, I do something. I'm a good team captain or orchestra conductor. My goal is for all of you ladies to run the world. So like literally like that is my goal. And if in this conversation you walk out feeling smarter and better and like you have a path, that's the win for me. Not that you remember me or the anything about you know what I know, because you're my priority. And literally I've spent my life trying to break down barriers so that you can have the opportunities. And I often will say to people, it's because, you know, I have a 30-year-old daughter. You guys are paving the way for her. I need you to show her what real leadership looks like. And so thank you for coming today, for stepping into your leadership, for taking a risk. I want you to know, and Linda was with me in a retreat we did a couple of weeks ago, and everyone was absolutely unbelievable. Their bios are ridiculous. And every single one of them walked into that retreat we did. It was a little 3-day retreat. And everyone was like, "Oh, I'm not sure I'm good enough to be here." All right, this is what I want you to do. I just want you to breathe into it, my friends. Just take a deep breath. Let your shoulders go down. You're in the right place. You're supposed to be getting on a corporate board on your journey. You're also supposed to be thinking about investing in venture capital because we have to change who's getting funding. And we have the power, wealth, and influence as a generation like nobody's ever had in the history of this country. And so How Women Lead is all about that. Everything I just said. Our goal is to collectively come together and break down any barriers to you having all the opportunities that you need to have. There's some fun pictures here. I love doing these Photoshops, these when we go with our, bring our friends together and we take these photo shoots. And it warms my heart to see all these women. A lot of what I want you to be thinking about when you think about yourself in a relationship to leadership, and even when you think like, if you want to remember how women lead, right? It's about you as a whole person. So how many of you donate money to someone sometime? Every one of you. Okay, you're all philanthropists. All right, how many of you have a little bit of money somewhere, little or a lot, invested, even in your retirement account through work or something, right? Okay, you're all investors. And all of you are leading somewhere. And so, when I think about how do we really help women come into their, all the different opportunities that they should have, I think of you as a whole woman. And I'll give you one example that's, I think, pretty important and relevant for this conversation we're having today. I have been working in the space of getting women on public boards, corporate boards for a long time. And the very first group of women that got on those public boards, Evelyn Dilsaver, Allison Davis, there's some famous women that are those folks. Every one of them said that they got their first board seat. They got tapped on the shoulder for the first time because they were on a nonprofit board with somebody who met them there and said, "I've seen you in action. You'd be great for a corporate board." It's not a qualifier, but that's a good example of how all the parts of who you are and how you scaffold your life can come together really powerfully. And you really getting out there and building your networks is extremely important. 85% of all board searches are literally word of mouth from currently seated corporate board directors in their networks. It's not search firms. And so you today, whether getting on a board's ready for you today, or if it's ready for you're going to do it in 10 years, you need to be building those strategic networks that are going to help you. So when the time comes, you have really deep relationships with people. And I even do things like, my daughter is a violinist. I invite people to go see my daughter play the violin. things that have nothing to do with work. Building relationships with people in all kinds of ways is a critical part of how you get into that power. And sometimes in your 20s and 30s and early 40s, it's just not something you have time for and can really do. And so I want you to, you can pull the slides down. Thank you. Thank you. I know there's some kind of weird tech thing with the black boxes going on. I really want you to think about, you know, well, I don't know, the boxing thing, the boxes got me off track here, but let's pull up a poll. I want to find out who's here and what your areas of focus are. So if you can pull that up, that would be great. How are we doing? Did we get the poll results yet?
We're getting close, and it's a great mix of group. So I'm going to end the poll now, and you should all be seeing where you are.
Great. So a lot of startup boards and advising, that's interesting. Okay, good. This is a fantastic mix. And we'll speak to all of this today. I actually will also want to invite you to just put any questions that you have in the chat. So I'm going to go through today, and I'm going, if you want to pull up the little agenda real quick, Paula, I'll tell you what we're about to cover. And my goal is that this is experiential and interactive. So put questions in the chat. If I use lingo, something you don't understand, definitely let me know. I think Paula, good. Thank you. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the agenda. I think it's the slide before. No, slide before. Okay. That's okay. You know what, I'll do the credo. It's different than my slides. Yeah, so one of the biggest things for us, as we think about how we're going to transform the environment so it's better for all of us, it has really, truly, I just want all of us to just acknowledge the culture hasn't been good for us. There's all kinds of things about the culture we grew up in, and we participated in it. So you guys remember that movie, The Mean Girls? Do you guys remember that movie? We live that, right? So many of us, you know, if you think about it, if you're going to go to an event with 50 people that you don't know, do you ever sort of think, oh, you know, am I going to fit in? Are people going to be kind to me? Am I going to feel like, you know, I found my, you know, I feel comfortable. And really sometimes women are the worst to each other. We actually get that, honestly. The culture, it really encourages us, frankly, to tear other women down. And so I actually, every group I'm in and within our organization, everybody takes the Girl Scouts pledge to be fierce advocates for each other. This is countercultural, and it's really critical. And when you think about getting a corporate board seat, it's all about somebody recommending you. It's them advocating for you or being your sponsor when you're not in the room. The other thing that men do actually better than we do, and women are kind of discouraged from doing this historically, is really making introductions for each other. Have you guys ever been in an organization, especially women's organizations, like, this is a no pitch zone? It's like, well, then how are we supposed to get ahead if we can't tell people how we can partner? That always sort of bugged me, but it's so ingrained in how we grew up. And men will meet you on the golf course and they'll be like, sure, I'll introduce you to Joe Schmo VC. And women are really odd about how we've been trained to be super hyper protective. So saying yes to helping each other and making introductions and actually booking 15 minutes of your day every day to just make sure in the mornings you get up and you're making introductions for other women and you're reinforcing her voice. Like even on LinkedIn, right? Somebody has a win, comment, promote it, tell other people about it. And then finally, this is the, you know, and when I ask people to really lean into this, I'm really serious about all of us wanting to have a new culture that's better for women and for each other, to be unabashedly visible. So many of us are taught to be the behind the scenes person, to be that person who it's like doesn't, literally women are told not to take up space. We cross our legs, we shrink. We're, the guys spread out and we shrink. And that shows up in a lot of ways, and it is not good for us. And when I talk about, stepping in, taking up space, a lot of us struggle with that a little bit. And what I want to encourage you to think about is that my daughter, who works in tech, she's 30, she's getting her cues from how much space and how much power she can take up from you, from the women who are ahead of her. So somebody's watching you, somebody is seeing you. And I want you to think about how that can be a ripple effect for other people if you can stand it and step into your power. So what do you guys think? Can you guys try to do this new culture? All right, thank you, everyone. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now I'm going to go over a little bit of data. Okay, so and I'm not going to hang out here too long, and we can send you these slides, but I just want you to know what's happened in the last 10 years. So How Women Lead was part of a network of people who helped move the needle from 10% of public company boards seats held by women to now 34%. Huge transformation in the market. When one person is on a board, literally people can't even hear your voice. You're marginalized, and it doesn't really change very much. But if you have 3 women, and actually now we know just people who are other, people who aren't white guys. You can have a Black guy, you can have a Latina woman, an Asian woman, whatever combination of 3 people, that changes the board dynamic, and people will listen to you. Product recalls happen 3 times faster. Literally, people's lives are saved because of it. And it is a protective mechanism for governance. And as a result, BlackRock and State Street and Fidelity, these asset management companies who buy up all the stock when you have a company that goes public, they actually require you have 2 women on your board in order for them to invest. They will vote against your nominations and governance chair in the proxy season. So what happened is, I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago that most of those asset management firms came out and made those mandates. All of a sudden, Goldman Sachs took advantage of it and tried to say, we will not take a company public without 2 women on their board. They acted like it was magnanimous. Well, no kidding, because nobody will buy up the stock. So they had no choice. Fine, we'll give them a little bit of credit. But what's happened is all of a sudden I'm getting calls from people saying, can you find me 2 women? Because my company's going to go public. So I just wanted you to kind of know that context. Most of the data I can share with you today is really about women on our representation on public company boards. That's what we can mandate. And that's really what we can track well. We have other kinds of information and data around private companies, which a lot of you are interested in, this venture and private equity space. This is what I want you to know as I go through and talk to you about the data. You can't mandate it. At least I don't know how yet. And because of that, you have to think about when are those decisions made and who gets those board seats? Well, who gets the first board seats outside of the founder and maybe the CFO or one other operator? It's the venture capitalists, right? We're missing from venture capital. We are not playing the game. And that's a problem for us. That means we're not getting those first board seats. Culture's set in the first 30 people. So, you go on a board when it's going public, how much benefit can you really bring to that board? It's going to take a while. So I want you to also think about this connection between you understanding the venture landscape and actually taking some of that money. We all agreed you have something invested. You can take retirement funds, donor advised funds, or cash or a trust and invest it in venture. And, there are venture firms that have as low as $10,000 as the minimum investment amount. So just planting the seed for you to think about that right now. All right. So this year, you can see here, based on this particular index of 3,000 companies in the Russell 3000, what kind of representation we had. And what we're seeing is, while there was a big mandate about getting women and people of color on boards, we're, as far as I'm concerned, it's slowing down on the public board space, in part because once the mandates came out, companies had to, they basically expanded the size of their board, which is expensive for them. So let's say you had a board that was 8 people and you had to have 2 to 3 women on your boards. People would actually increase the size of the board because, other people had terms and they weren't terming off yet. Well, as people are terming off now, they're not replacing those board members. They're kind of shrinking those boards. So just interesting for you guys to know. Let's keep going on the slides. We are nowhere near doing a good job in terms of racial and ethnic diversity or LGBTQ representation. We're really not doing a good job. African Americans are actually doing a little bit better than other groups, and in part it's because of the leadership in the African American community. And I'm really excited that I have a kick-ass board and a group of women who've been involved with us. And they created something called Black Women on Boards about 1.5 years ago. And literally there's a film that just came out, starting at the Tribeca Film Festival and going through the film circuits, all about Black women on board. It's called On Board. And I'm in the film. And that's an example of like what I think of as movement building. Like, it should be ubiquitous. We should all be talking about getting on boards, and we need to organize ourselves in perhaps even smaller groups so we can really collectively move the needle forward. Latinas always lag. They're always last. It's terrible. If you look at any numbers, Latinas are at the bottom of the barrel, and getting on public company boards is no exception. So let's keep going. So let's talk about sectors. You got, your association and the women in it are in luck because in many ways, some of the things that I would think are really relevant for women in clean tech are industries where you're actually seeing some pretty decent representation. Like, I was called on to source candidates for the PG&E board. Now, that's not really clean tech necessarily, but I think they're doing some things. And I bet, some of you might have been interested in being on a board like that. So I think it's kind of interesting to see, like, who, where do we see some decent representation and where do we have work to do? Let's keep going. And then you can look in the states. Now, California is really important because the majority of public companies are in California and New York. There are many states that are listed here that have 5 public companies. They have very few. So where California, efforts in California impact the entire country because we have so many public companies here. Let's keep going. And so this is now talking about private company boards. We're really lagging. We're talking about, on average, 1 woman on private company boards. And I would just assert that if we all start investing in venture, that really changes the game. And this is the thing, let's say you invest in a historically male-focused venture firm. By being an investor, you have power. Your money has power. You can ask good questions. You can say, how many women take up the board seats for the companies that you invest in? How many women CEOs are in your portfolio? So just again, underscoring the power of you thinking about stepping in to that space. Now, where women are getting board seats in the private market is the first independent director. So what happens in private companies is you start the company, sometimes around seed or Series A, you create a board. It's the CEO, CFO maybe, and then a couple of the venture capitalists Well, right around Series C, as the company grows more and more, we get to this point where we start to, realize we need independent directors, and sometimes it become the arbiter between the CEO or the staff team and the venture capitalists as the company starts to grow. Women are the majority of the independent board directors because companies in part know that they're going to have women on their boards to go public. Let's keep going. Paula, it looked like you were going to say something to me. Am I, do I need to go faster? No, okay, all right, good. All right. So I'm going to encourage us to keep going, but if you have a woman on your board, honestly, this quote is a little bit odd because it's kind of a cause and effect. It says you're more likely to have gone public the following year than those with all male boards, probably because you have to. So interesting step, but if you're a data geek like I am, you kind of got to look into it and understand why. Let's keep going. All right, now let's talk about what is influencing and where we stand with the laws. Today, we have a couple laws in California. We helped pass Senate Bill 826, which is requiring that you have generally 3 women on your board. Kind of it's scaffolded based on the size of the company. And then we also have a bill, AB 979, that requires that you have ethnic and sexual orientation diversity on your board. That was passed a year later. And what has ended up happening is just like the affirmative action stuff that's going on with the Supreme Court, we had some challenges to those laws. The laws have been upheld. They're still in place. So if you ever heard a rumor that those laws are not in place anymore, they are. I'm on the governor's task force overseeing the implementation of them. That said, we actually feel really strongly Senate Bill 826 is going to be upheld. We have amicus briefs going on with a couple law firms and partner organizations. AB 979 wasn't a super well-written bill, and it might not sustain. And we're working on legislation in Illinois. Right now, we've got some basic tracking. It got super watered down from the original legislation we tried to pass in Illinois, but we're working on step 2. Let's keep going. Is this interesting to you guys? I'm kind of want to make sure you guys know enough about the landscape and we're going to get into you now. Okay, so this is now getting into the how-tos. So the role of the board, and I guess it would have been better before showing this slide for you to actually sit and think about, like, what do you think is the role of a board? Does anyone want to chime in from your own board experience? You can read this, but I also want to talk a little bit about it. Anybody here want to tell me what you think, what your role has been on boards you've been on? So this is the thing, all this is fine. There's like a list here. The number one thing that you're responsible for as a board member is to support that CEO. And if the CEO is not doing a good job, you have to fire them and get another one. That's like really the most important thing you're responsible for. And what ends up happening in some situations is people, they want, and I did this when I was younger, they want to add value. So they start, offering to do work, or they start to get too involved. And this is the concept of that we all, if you can remember anything, it's noses in, fingers out. You got to be paying attention, but you better stop not offer to do the work. And I think that when you're interviewing for a board seat, if anyone gets a whiff that you're going to be a pain in the ass board member, you're not going to, especially if that's your reputation, you're not going to get a board seat. And what that is like the person who wants to show how smart they are. Or the person who's like, oh, CEO, you don't know what you're doing, and I'm just going to pick you apart all day long. You guys ever been on the receiving end of that? I have. That is no fun. And we're just like, how do we move this person into another role that's better suited for them and off my board? So I think it's important for you to know what the board does, but I think it's important for you to understand how the board should behave. Because especially if it's a public board, you can't go off that board. You know, they're not, it looks bad for the company, for the board to have a turnover when your term's not up. So you really need to know who's going on the board for you, with you. So let's keep going to the next. Let's keep going to the next one. But you need to be thinking about, is your reputation that you're a great question asker, that you're super supportive, that you're super strategic, that you're a great connector. Those are all the things you might want to be thinking about in terms of your reputation, and you can start showing that in a nonprofit board environment. So in a corporate board, you know, generally we think about preserving and enhancing shareholder value and managing the risk, right? Asking great questions that ensure that whoever's an investor in this company is being taken care of. And in a corporate board, in a startup phase, you're going to get equity. And it's kind of all over the map. There's no real guidelines. And it kind of depends on how much you bring to the company and how much time you spend. On a public board, it's publicly disclosed and it's generally cash and equity. Most private companies are not going to pay you cash, except like a family board or a company that's not going to have an exit, like an IPO. Okay. So for nonprofit boards, again, this is all about preserving and enhancing, but really it's about stakeholders. Do you guys know that book, Good to Great by Jim Collins? You know, it's I don't know, it was kind of the Bible a lot of us read in the early 2000s. He's really good at looking at corporate behavior. And he's got a bunch of fun things that we all talk about all the time, but he has a compendium for the nonprofits, and he says, forget everything I said in the book about corporate good to great. You have so many stakeholders in a nonprofit. That is the complexity of running a nonprofit, and knowing and understanding that as a board member is critical. You're responsible to everybody because you literally are a community trust when you're a nonprofit. You don't pay taxes. So you are accountable to the whole community. You definitely are responsible to your donors who gave you money to do what you said, to anybody who volunteers their precious time, to anyone who's a beneficiary, and making sure that if you promise you're going to provide a service, that they're getting what they deserve. And really, you know, the entire community, often in nonprofits, especially highly visible ones, they all feel like they own you. And that's hard on the nonprofit leader. And so again, I'll underscore how important it is to support that executive director or CEO of that nonprofit. And really, what do you get in return? You get to donate, but you also get public visibility, and you get relationship building, and you get to feel like you know, you're making a difference and having an impact in the world. One of the things we know is women in adolescence, you know, this sort of 45 to 65 age, you know, having an impact is a critical part of what we need to do in this life stage in order to be fulfilled. So hopefully you're all on nonprofit boards, or you're looking at getting on one. It's an important part of the beautiful complexity of your life. All right, let's keep going. All right, so here are the steps to getting on a board. First, and we're going to do this light today. And then we're going to, I certainly encourage you, if you really want to dive in deeper, we have a 5-week course. We have a Get On Board conference in October. There's lots of opportunities with us. So first you want to think about, am I ready? When will I be ready? What do I need to do to put on my roadmap to be ready? And then even what type of a board, right? Am I ready for a startup? And you kind of have to think about, you know, what's your background already? I've never worked in a public company. I will not be an appropriate public company board member. So the next thing you want to know is a little bit of what we just talked about the board's role, but even more deeply, like, how do you really make sure you understand the fiduciary and legal responsibilities of the board? Next is you having a clear intention. I want to go on the board of a company that is a Series C and above company that is in clean tech, that has, you know, that's in certain states, and what I want to contribute, then my value is that I know how to knock down regulatory barriers. Or, you need to think about like what kind of board am I right for? And its industry, its stage, its, focus, and what guardrails will you put up for yourself? And I would say right now, start to scribble it down when you think about it, because we're going to go into breakout now. And then I want you to think about your own value. If I have a board opportunity for you tomorrow, what are you going to tell me you could bring to that board? What is your value proposition, and what can you bring as a strategic advantage to that board and that organization? The narrower your board focus, the better. And this is why I do board searches. If you say to me, I'd like to go on a board, any board, do you think I'm going to remember you? I have no hook. It's like, well, you and 5,000 other women. If you say to me, I want to go on a Series C to D Cleantech board, and I can serve on the audit committee, that I'll remember. And I will always open the aperture for you. You don't have to tell me, and you could also go on a utility board, and you could also, I just need to be able to remember our conversation and what you said. So I would say the narrower, the better. And with your value proposition, you're then going to create a series of board documents. We call it a board bio. It can be a board resume. You might end up with both the more serious you get. And you definitely need to make sure your LinkedIn is very clear. The first thing I do when somebody says I'm looking for this type of person is I go onto LinkedIn. And if I can't find you on LinkedIn, if your LinkedIn shows that you have no connections, you're not going to be as strong of a candidate. A lot of what board members do, especially in the earlier stages, which is what a lot of you said you were interested in, is connect to investment opportunities, connect to professional staff that you can hire. So these are the steps to get you sort of ready to go. And we can talk in a little bit about sort of how to build your network and really work it. But now let's actually have you have a chance to work this, practice it a little bit. So let's go to the next one. So you're going to go into a breakout now. And I want you to fill out your own roadmap for yourself. Like start to scribble out those things that are relevant for you. And again, putting it down on paper, starting to get going is a really critical part of you making progress on this. So, and once you've sort of started to say, this is what I think is right-sized for me, talk with the group about it. And these are going to be small groups, just groups of 3. And I'll try and bounce between them. But I think we can go. What do you guys have any questions for me?
And we're gonna do a little bit of a time adjustment since we're gonna get into the panel. And both of our panelists have expertise in similar industries as you. So we went ahead and pre-created a roadmap for you to get you thinking, especially with your experience. What types of boards would you be good for? What type of experience do you have in an operating role? So we're gonna spend 10 minutes in a breakout. So do quick intros. It'll be breakouts of 2 to 3 folks, and discuss the roadmap and kind of your thought process as you're filling that out. We'll do a quick debrief and then we'll jump straight to our panel.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that was a good conversation. It's never enough time, I know, but this is just to sort of get you started, to wet your whistle. But we're going to keep going through some things that might be able to contribute as we go forward. So I just want to share a couple slides, and then we have a couple of experts that we're going to meet. So I wanted you to know sort of there is actually a changing set of demands of competencies that people want in their board members. When I started doing this work 10 years ago, it was really, you have to be a CEO or a CFO, and certainly financial expertise is a hot priority. But there's a lot of transformation in this market. If you're a cybersecurity expert, if you even know anything about computers, go get a cybersecurity certificate. It'll make a big difference. And we have a relationship with some folks that we can get you a discount from certifications for that, and ESG and a couple other things. Let's keep going. And then this is sort of relevant to what you just talked through, and maybe this can help you narrow a little bit more, to think about what are the types of companies that might be right for you. And so this is just sort of just a little teaser to help you think about what stage of company is right for you. Let's keep going. And, there's like a foreign foci boards. We're doing an event coming up about foci boards. There's all kinds of interesting little nuances. So if you have any questions about any of those, certainly pop it in the chat or let me know. This is just kind of giving you a sense of, where are the board seats in this country? So, of course, you've got, public company boards are most visible, the listed companies, but it's 3,600. But when you think about the startup universe, that is huge. There are so many more board seats available. So I'm glad that a lot of you have said that that's your priority. Let's keep going. So now you are so lucky that you're going to get to meet a couple friends of mine who are just brilliant. Vidisha Prasad is the board director at Centennial Resource Development, and she is what everybody wants, which is on the audit committee. So excited to have you here, Vidisha. And then Julie Bush. She has been a board director in a number of companies. Including Watchpoint Logistics. And so, Julie, we're so excited that you're here as well. So why don't we pull down these slides? And in fact, it might be fun. We were just talking about if everybody wants to go on video, we said it might be fun to take a little screenshot of all of us. Kristen, oh yeah, get closer. Good. If anyone, if everybody can sort of lean in a little bit, and then we're going to have our panelists talk to everybody. Are we cute? I think we look great. What do you think, Pam? Do you get most of us? Yeah, I think there's just a couple people. You got it? All right, good. We got a screenshot. All right, so if you want to highlight our panelists now, we're going to just quickly go through a couple of questions, and I want you to ask questions. This is like a big opportunity. These women are in hot demand. And it's exciting to have them here with us today. So Vidisha, can we start with you? Can you talk about your first board and actually kind of briefly talk about how you landed that first board seat?
Sure. So my career, you talked about financial expertise. I've been in energy and energy finance in particular for a couple decades now. I built most of my career on the advisory side as an investment banker. So I sat across the table from most boards, advising CEOs and boards in strategic deals. And interestingly, I left banking in 2018 to start my own fund. And I was in the thick of raising money and really building a firm bottom up. And so joining a board, particularly a public company board, was the last thing on my mind. I also have a young kid, so there's a lot going on. And one of those perfect storms where things come together in a week, really. The company was looking for somebody who had strategic experience. They were at a cusp of doing large M&A. They had missed a few deals. They wanted to refresh the board in a way that they could bring in very specifically capital markets and M&A expertise, which is what I had grown up doing. Here's a very interesting story. I was headhunted by a large recruitment firm, and I had known the recruiter for, I will say, 7 years. And in 7 years, I had never I'd know him socially, and we'd catch up for drinks and coffee all the time. And in 7 years, I'd never gotten a call from him about any role. I think he knew I was not looking, but never really talked about a job. And then out of the blue, one day they were like, you know what? We're looking for a board director who does this, this, this. It's a really good company, really big board. Would you be interested? And I was like, not the right time in my career. I felt like I might be too young for it, and a classic case of underestimating yourself. I was really, new mom and was building a fund, was out traveling a bunch. But it just happened. And it was one of those relationships that I would highlight. This is one of those unique stories where sometimes it takes years of relationship building for something to come up out of the blue. You didn't think that this was where this particular relationship will go. patience in relationship building is the key. And this was one of those examples.
Can I just say that there's so many people who've said to me, I got tapped for an opportunity. I was like, oh, no, I'm not ready for that. It's like, men would never say that. So if any of you feel that in your body, you call me before you say those words out of your mouth. I'll talk you off the ledge and make sure that how that you respond the way that's right for you. All right, Julie. Julie, can you share with us briefly, you have the laundry list of all the things we know about you is significant. What is your big expertise, and tell us about your first board opportunity.
Right. So I am all about strategy. I'm a very mission-driven individual, and I think that really comes through in all of my engagements, all of my jobs that I've kind of ever had. My journey is a bit different than Vidisha's. I love the variety, but I will say the board opportunity came from someone with whom I'd had a very long-term relationship. And I'm telling you, it came out of the blue, and I'll tell you exactly the moment it happened. But just to give a little bit of background, so I've always been in the marketing space. I came up through marketing research. And so I've always had a very customer-centric, focus on any type of strategic solution. I had a long-term consulting relationship with the owner of this logistics company. I'd just been performing a lot of work for them for many, many years. And they were in the process of going through a pretty significant multifaceted transformation. And he decided to put together a small board and to kind of help them through that transition. So he asked me to come on to that board and represent the voice of the customer in the kinds of decisions that they would have to be making during that transition. And so and this is a smaller company. So it's a privately held global logistics company here in the Bay Area. So that's kind of the story. But just to give you a feel for like how these things just sort of land, one day he invited me and my husband and my son over to his home for, like cocktail hour. And my son was in high school at the time. And so we kind of, arrived and we were chatting and we sat down and on the beautiful view overlooking the bay. And he says, so I've invited you over because I'd like you to join my board of directors. And my husband and my son, their faces were like, wow, mom is like super cool. So that was like a really super cool moment. So it's just a fun little story, but that's a relationship that's been there for a couple of decades. So that's just sort of how it happened.
I think you guys are like just singing the same tune. It's relationships, right? And sometimes people used to work for you, or people you used to work for. Like, it's amazing if you live long enough, like the people it's interesting to see who will create that next company and they're going to know you were so fantastic to work with. Julie, how did you you talked about the voice of the customer, going from being a CMO to having that as the entry point. Is that continue to be what value do you bring to the boards based on your background? One thing is probably why they brought you on, but what do you think you do most? Yeah.
Right. Well, as some of my co-board members at WCS will know, Sarah, Pam, I can see you, and I think there might be a couple others on here. I am obsessed with strategy because I have seen working with Fortune 500 companies for a long time, with their either at the highest level or at the division level, or multinational companies, multi-billion-dollar organizations. There are always bottlenecks, right? There are always problems that these companies need to solve. And no matter where they are in their life stage, I have found that when you refocus the group on the company's vision, mission, goals, strategy, it takes the focus off of all the noise and interpersonal, this, that, and the other, and budgets and P&Ls, and puts a spotlight on the purpose of the organization. Why are we here? Well, guess what? We're not really here to build a widget. We are here to solve a customer's problem. We have a community, a marketplace, B2B, B2C, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's why we're here. And when you refocus the group on that, like suddenly, all of a sudden, it feels like it just, everything seems to fall into place.
Well, in any good CMO is strategist working on vision, mission, all that stuff you just described. Like, and I think so often, like I've had general counsel, people who've been general counsels, who are also strategists and have to work across the whole part, all the company. Sometimes people will say, oh, we don't need a lawyer on our board. It's like, come on. So anything you can do to round out the story about how people can think about you from beyond just that one narrow title that is how you've, introduced yourself in the past. But clearly, if you're in the C-suite, you got to be doing all that stuff. Afia Samoa, general counsel of Google Health, was really struggling to get people to think about her as, more than the lawyer. And she invested in our venture fund at How Women Invest, put it on her LinkedIn, and it gave people they took a second look at her, and then that she got her first board seats. And so, Vidisha, do you think that you being in venture actually changed how people were thinking about you as a potential board member, or what do you think was the reason why? What was your value that you brought most, and why? What did they think they were going to get? What did they really get?
Yeah, it's at the time I was really starting out in venture, so I wouldn't necessarily say that was the reason I was hired. But since then, and as I articulate my board proposition to prospective boards, I really think about this in 3 buckets. What's your hard skill? Your day-to-day hard skills. So for me, that was finance, and from all SEC purposes, I would tick off the audit committee seat automatically. What's your stretch skill? For me, that was energy, carbon. There's a lot of different ways of playing the energy ecosystem. I was building a fund, raising money, looking at a number of deals that were in the climate ESG space. And that was, I wasn't a fully established fund manager with a 10-year track record, but I was on the front line scrapping for deals that could actually be brought in-house, in particular to help how the company thought about their own operations and how they automated and how they modernized their own operations. So that's your stretch skill. And then the third thing I would say is really what your soft skills are. And this is much harder for women to articulate, I think, but really everything you've done in your career, whether it's building a team, whether it's having seen a turnaround in your own prior job somewhere, whether it's having worked on a restructuring, all of that things, that you may not have been the key person for, but you've had that experience of having either gone through it or having been a team member that had a front row seat towards it. All of that adds up to being a 360-degree board member. You need to know a little about a lot of things to be a very good, effective board member. And you need to know 1 or 2 things that are really your core competence. So particularly these days, I think boards, and you highlighted this earlier, the different boards will look for, we need an operational expertise because XYZ, we're doing this, or we need a regulatory expertise because we really, really are in that moment in time. But those individuals' hard skills are great. At the same time, we all have so many other experiences. You build a multi-decade career, you've seen a lot. Articulating that, even if you weren't at the top of the line there, if you weren't the CEO, it doesn't matter. As long as you went through that process and you have some experience that you bring to the table, very important to put that on the table. And I think for me, I put these things like, look, I check off the finance, strategy, audit committee, all of that. In the carbon business, looking at climate deals. I've done a lot of work around ESG. Everybody's trying to figure out what ESG means, particularly for the energy companies. No better, no worse than anyone else, if you will, in terms of understanding that space. That's my second skill. And then the third thing is I have a 20+ year career in investment banking. I've seen restructuring. I've seen people going public. I've seen investors. Yeah, I may not know the most recent person who's done the last IPO because that's no longer my day job. But you know what? all of that 360-degree experience I bring to the table, and between myself and my network, I can add value to your board. And I think that third piece is a really critical piece that we all often forget to articulate. And that's our whole person, our whole career that you bring to your table.
Now, don't you guys feel like, yeah, if you build a board, you want Julie and Vidisha on your board. Like,
Yeah.
they're amazing. Everybody here, I really want you to think about scribbling down right now what's a hard skill that you have that's going to be obvious. What is your stretch skill and what are your soft skills? Write them down. This is how you get yourself to the point where you could begin to articulate it. Just keeping it in your head and swirling. We all know that doesn't work. Julie, I'd love to hear from you. You're the marketing goddess. What did you do? Did you write articles, or what did you do to like brand yourself? Did you do anything specifically to like make sure people knew what value you could add?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that is a tough one to do, because I'm one of those people who's fabulous at marketing everything but myself.
Of course.
And I will tell you, like, I continue to mold and sculpt, my own personal mantra, right? Like my tagline. I did hire an executive coach who is actually part of this ecosystem, Urvi Bandari. So that's a little special shout out. Talk about, advocating for each other, who I meet with on, occasionally. And so it took me a long time. Let me just say this. It took me a long time to really chisel away all the noise, like Vidisha's talking about. We have so many different experiences. What is that core strength that I get really excited about? I think that's key. What is that one thing you're really passionate about? So it took me a while to get to that, Julie. I'll be honest. I wasn't one of these like overnight, like I'm a merger and acquisition, goddess. So I have started to do some writing, but mostly I just talk it. That's who I am. I get out there, I network, I meet as many people as possible in as many different networks as possible. And I just talk strategy and how fabulous it is. So that's how I do it.
Yeah. Well, I think so many of us, struggle with being unabashedly visible. And I would say to all of you, really, truly, get an executive coach like Julie did. Hire somebody, even if you're hiring the college student that's just going to help keep you honest. Talk to your friends and colleagues and sisters and interview them and say, what do you think my value proposition is? Or you tell them what you've defined, because they're going to be like, well, I can't believe you put that at this happens all the time. I'll look at someone's bio and it's like, you buried the lead, like put that as the number one thing. Right. And so this is the time to both brag, but also show the value that you bring as a strategist, which is really quite different. And that's why it's so hard for all of us, Julie and all of us, to talk about ourselves in the board context, also because it's a new way of talking about yourself. So Vidisha, have you written a bunch of articles? Do you feel like, if I Google you, is it super clear what your value proposition is?
It's so interesting you asked that. So I'm a little bit old school. I think, content creation was not something I grew up around. And I've now noticed that it is a really, really big deal. And a number of people put out content. And I guess it's because it's so much easier than it used to be, right? You back in the day, you had to kind of put on a Wall Street Journal article to be meaningful. Right. Now you can put it out on LinkedIn, you can put it out on Medium. So I don't do that. And I will say that is something that I've actually thought a lot about. And if I could create and pocket of time, that is one thing I would absolutely do. And so those who are good writers and want to put out content, I think it's a great idea to do that. There are,
someone to write it for you, like literally,
I've looked at that as well. And here's where, this is where I'm sure there are many women here will empathize with this. A lot of us are so focused on, we want to do it our way. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to find and trust somebody, and particularly in a topic that energy and climate has become somewhat political in the discourse. And not everybody brings the same views, but you're right. I should look into that and see if I can find somebody who'll write it. The one thing I will say, and both Julie and I highlighted this earlier, boards really ultimately are about relationships in some ways, and so there is a element of personal branding that comes in an old school way, which is in person, whether it's NACD events, whether it's events like these. If you're looking at private company boards, incubators in your town, in the Bay Area in particular, is rich with possibilities here, right? Going out and meeting people, and when I say going out, I don't necessarily mean go attend every cocktail event at the expense of your work and home life. I mean, making sure that you're at those right moments, right events, right people. Even if you can't attend the event, actually following up and saying, hey, couldn't make it to this event, but saw you were attending, would love to catch up and tell you more, hear what you're doing, and to share a little bit about what I'm doing as well. I think that in-person element is really, really important. Unless you, in my experience, unless you're a really, really popular writer where you've got, a few hundred thousands of followers, writing alone necessarily may not get you the look that you need. I actually personally think it's a lot easier to make an impression in person, but that's, that may just be too old for that. So.
Well, so it's interesting that you just said I'm going to use my language. You didn't say this, but as an operator, I like things to be done my way, and I wouldn't call myself or you a control freak. But so with that sort of in mind, and thinking about exactly what you just said about relationships and sort of how people think of you as a board member, I mentioned earlier the sort of adage, noses in and fingers out. Do you have a mantra, Vidisha, like something where you're like, this is how I function as a board member. This is sort of my way of showing up.
I would say constructive everywhere, regardless of whether you're disagreeing with the management, disagreeing with another board member, questioning, debating. It has to be done in a way that people feel they're not attacked. And it's one of those things, those of you who have been on the corporate side and have sat in board meetings on the other side of the table, management teams do get a little bit proprietary about the way they do things. And the board relationship is one that needs to be managed with constructive feedback, with firmness when needed, but at the same time with a level of respect and partnership that actually allows things to get done. The number of board meetings, and I've seen this both on the advisory side and public company board meetings, and our board, in our boards now, it's for private companies that we invest in. It's very easy to talk for 2 hours and walk out without actually having made some decisions. So if you're the kind of person that likes to drive a point and really, or drive the conversation and look for solutions and search for solutions, then you have to find a way to do it very constructively. And so, I do a lot of back channel conversations, for example, for ahead of the board meeting. If I have a question that I think might potentially be controversial or embarrassing, I will make sure that I first ask the CEO offline. It doesn't mean I won't bring it up, just that he's prepared to answer that. And I think that really goes a long way. It helps.
Yeah. So they don't feel blindsided. Yeah. Well, and also they feel like they trust you. I was a terrible board member in the first couple of boards I was on because I'm an operator, and I was like, let me just show you how it's done, and it's like, yeah, that's not helpful. You're not on the staff. So like understanding sort of the balance of how can you be supportive, constructive, and a strategic value add.
I would say the opposite of that as well, Julie, because I was not an operator, and we often feel if there's a topic being discussed that you weren't majoring in your day job, it's easy to not speak up. And actually that I learned that the harder way, where I realized, well, actually, I do have a smart question and no one else is asking this. Yeah, I wasn't an operator, but it's a question that probably needs to be asked. And the first couple of times I did that, it led to a discussion, and that really, really taught me something. Like, sometimes nobody really wants to rock the boat, or nobody wants to ask the tough questions. So don't underestimate what you're thinking and what your questions are, and they're probably all valid. And so it's worth doing the opposite as well.
Yeah. All right, great, good perspective. You know, Julie, you've been so generous with so many the women, you know, are trying to get on boards, and the women I know. Have you seen any threads here about what women don't get about how to show that they know their role as a director? Any mistakes that you think people should avoid?
Well, I think that a lot of those mistakes are, you know, they're already out there in the ether, right? It's the feeling like, well, I don't deserve to be here. I'm underqualified. I don't know what I'm doing. You know, you just feel like a fish out of water. And you just have to shake that idea loose, because it's just not true.
Yeah.
You are supposed to be there.
Uh-huh.
Yes, you are supposed to be there. And yes, like as Vidisha's saying, you are supposed to speak up. And, you know, I've experienced the same thing. People are reticent to ask questions or to raise their opinions. But believe me, and I've been told, the very first board meeting at Watchpoint Logistics, I started asking questions.
Yeah.
After the board meeting, the CEO and owner called me and he said, that's the first time anyone has ever asked a question on the board at a board meeting.
What?
And he said, and it was great because one of the other board members who's never said anything actually talked in that meeting. So you absolutely, you know, have to get rid of those preconceived notions of, you know, lesser value and imposter syndrome and all that kind of stuff. That's
You're there for a reason. Yeah. All right. I'm going to do a couple lightning rounds with you guys, but I want to encourage anybody here who has questions for these brilliant women, please speak now or forever hold your peace. So unless somebody else raises their hand and chimes in, I'm going to ask you some questions. Julie, how much time do you spend on your board meetings? How much time in prep? And then how much time sort of in individual meetings with the team? Like, give us a little bit of a picture of your time commitment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I would say I definitely spend I spend a few hours preparing for board meetings, whether it's nonprofit or corporate or private company board. I definitely prepare in advance. You know, I definitely want to get my story straight. And as Vidisha was starting to say, I definitely talk to other board members. It is very important to build relationships with other board members, so that takes time as well. So I would include that. So yeah, I mean, it's you know, it's up to you, but it could be 1 to 2 hours a week, or it could be more than that.
Excellent. Thank you. Vidisha, can you talk about what you talked about being on the audit committee? And then it looked like the ESG committee, maybe. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you pick what committees to go on and how much time you're committing?
Yeah, it's similar to what Julie said. You know, I typically spend the day before all the committee meetings going deep diving into the materials. And I say day before partly because that's when the materials arrive. So it's somewhat driven by that. And then committee meetings tend to be a full day, depending on what company you're on. And then board meetings tend to be a second day, but half the day, let's say. So that's about 2.5 days of commitment per quarter, at least, in addition to conversations throughout the quarter. You know, I try to do at least one, likely 2 calls a quarter with the CEO and or CFO. And these are casual conversations, you know, hey, saw this in the market, what's going on, or, you know, saw this press release, those kinds of things. If you're a committee chair, there is a increased level of responsibility leading up to the board meeting, because preparing for that committee meeting is a little bit of extra work, and that probably will require extra number of hours both throughout the quarter but also leading up to the board meeting. Typically committee chairs are compensated more as well, so you're generally compensated for that extra time as well. I served on both the audit committee as well as the nominating, governance, and ESG committee. It was all one nom-gov ESG committee. You know, how I chose to be on it was really a function of what my expertise was and frankly what the company needed at the time. Typically companies, all public companies, will balance the skills matrix against what committees you're in. And audit was just given my financial background, and nominating governance and ESG was just a function of the fact that that was partly my background and partly that's where a seat was open. So that's really how it got there.
Julie, can you give us an example of a time where you felt like you were really challenged on a board, either by, maybe there was a lack of integrity or lack of transparency, or a board member that was not behaving themselves, or, can you, without divulging industry secrets, if you will, is there anything you can share with us about a challenging time and then how you handled it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's see.
Or has that been easy? Always.
It is not easy, and every board and every company definitely has their intrigue and issues, and they of course become more apparent, the more time you spend with the various individuals. So yeah, I mean, I definitely saw that there was very different relationship dynamics within the board that I sat on. And I mean, ultimately, I just default back to, okay, we need to step back, and it's not about this relationship or that relationship or how they communicate with each other. And I mean, it's like a bunch of, women, like that stereotype that does not exist. And again, refocus that conversation around why everyone is in the room and what is it that the customers want, and how can we focus our time and be productive in that way.
Excellent. Vidisha, can you tell us real quick the difference between an advisory board and a governing board member? And then we'll do a quick last lightning round.
Sure. A governing board member has fiduciary duties, and an advisory board member typically does not. And by fiduciary duties, I mean, not only do you have to attend or should very likely attend all the meetings, you're really signing off and everything. So you can get sued, and that's a pretty big deal. An advisory board is really a way to capitalize on your skill set while you're learning about a company. They're learning things from you. You're part of the board composition in some ways, and this is all negotiated. You, as an advisory board member, you may be allowed to sit in a regular board meeting as well. But it really is a skills transfer and a skills exchange, sort of setup versus a fiduciary duty and a governance setup. And that really, in terms of how you relate with the company and the management team, there, depending on what the issues are, there may be certain places where if you're on the governance side of things, you may be across the table from the management. Let's say it's a restructuring situation, you have to fire the CEO. An advisory board meeting is a lot gentler than the governance side.
Often my advisory roles are more one-on-one than they are in the meetings anyway. It's me advising the CEO directly, and I'll have a standing call every 2 weeks and Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, so
it's a great point, by the way. So to be able to really add value, and frankly for it to add value to you and your resume, trust is a very big deal about advisory boards. They can basically never call you, and there's nothing you can do about it. A governance board, the CEO has to take my call. If not right away, at some point he has to return the call. And that's just how the governance side of it works.
Okay, very last little lightning. If both of you guys could answer this, what's your final tip for women with backgrounds in sustainability and clean tech? How can they leverage that skill set to jump on the right kind of board for them?
Yeah, well, this industry is in an incredible exponential growth time, and so the viewpoint of anyone who knows about clean tech and sustainability is valuable for any kind of company, whether they're in the industry or not, from a generic ESG perspective. So you have a very unique perspective and experience compared to a lot of other people out there right now, just by virtue of the fact that you're working in this space. And if you're a female working in this space, you're this 10%. So that makes you even more special.
You're so special, all of you. How about you, Vidisha?
Yeah, I would echo everything Julie said. You know, in practical terms, not only is this industry growing really fast, it is also a very vast industry to begin with. Clean tech is a lot of different things. It's everything from software to hydrogen to solar to wind. And so really, you know, cast your net wide, deconstruct, and Julie gave this example of really trying to put down your skill set, but deconstruct your skill sets such that you can figure out what the crossovers are, because it really is a very, very vast space. There's a lot of people who call themselves sustainability experts, and for good reason, because they come at it from very different angles. All of those angles are valid, and see where you can fit in.
Excellent. Thank you so much. You're brilliant. We're so lucky to have had you get to give us real life examples. We talked a little bit about each of their brands for our speakers today. And this is what I want you to do just real quick before we go into our next section. Google yourself. Just Google your name. If you haven't done it for a while, it's really good to do. And if I'm looking for someone for a board seat, what am I going to find? And is that what you want me to find? If there's not much about you, I'll remind you that if you don't tell people what they should know about you and think about you, they're going to make it up themselves. And it may or may not be what you want them to think. So you don't want to have too many blanks out there. How are you guys doing? Do you feel like when you Google yourself, you're like, yeah, this is pretty good? Or are you like, oh, I see an action. Create a couple action steps, put it down. Let me give you an example of something that I did. It sounds like these gals didn't have to do any of this, but this is what I did. When I first started this part of my journey in life, I actually hired a 21-year-old. And I had her come over to my house every Saturday morning for a couple hours. It was a forcing function for me to both work on my brand and my networks. And, you know, also once you get into sort of really getting out there and working your network, making sure that I was in front of the right people. So we all have, you know, we all do our tricks to figure out how to make sure that we get out of our own, discomfort. But I'd encourage you to think about that. So we have just 20 more minutes left. So I'm going to kind of dive back in. And again, I'll invite you to ask any questions in the chat or just raise your hand. Let's keep going from this slide. All right. So these are a couple questions you want to ask yourself when you think about your own brand. Is this memorable? Like I said earlier, well, you know, the narrower, the better. Is there a story about you that you want out there or that you feel like you're consistently doing? And is that right? And how are other people speaking about you? All right, let's keep going on the slides. Let's keep going. So let's talk now about what materials you literally need. So I always say first, what's your value proposition? What value will you bring to that board? And you got great examples from Julie and Vidisha. From that, you're then going to create a one-page board bio that's largely prose, but you know, lots of people like to do bullet points. And this is where, like, if you really, some people say you don't need one of these. The truth is, like, if someone doesn't have a board bio, it's harder to get the word out about them. It's just make it easy for anybody you're talking to. If you want to go on the board of Tesla, I would say go onto the website and see how the Tesla board members are talking about themselves. There's a couple, there'll be a couple paragraphs about them, and emulate yourself against those. Someone said in the chat, use ChatGPT. Probably nothing wrong with doing that either. Write a board bio for. I've never tried that, but it can't hurt. I've tried other things. And then when you think about your own resume, there's a way to make it a board focused CV where you pull up a number of your advisory board and other board roles and you make that more prominent, but still retain a number of the sort of traditional things that you would have about your career. I mentioned LinkedIn. You need to make sure that if I search for an audit committee member of a clean tech company, it's going to say, you're going to have keywords in your LinkedIn that say audit clean tech, right? So I want you to just think about making sure that your LinkedIn represents you well. And then both of these great board leaders were giving us some great stories. And that really became, that in-person storytelling became how they distinguished themselves and how they got those first board seats. These are all the things you want to be thinking about when you're sort of positioning yourself for a board opportunity. Let's keep going. So when you map your value proposition, there might be, you kind of want to, obviously you can't have a long laundry list. So think about 3 to 5 leadership superpowers that you can use to describe yourself. And I feel like Julie and Vidisha did a beautiful job just now showing their superpowers. This is just to get you started. Here's some examples of what you might include. So why don't you write some of this down right now? If you were going to say 3 to 5 leadership superpowers that you think are relevant for a board, pop those on your worksheet that you're doing right now. Anybody have any ideas of anything that's missing here that you would say you'd like to add? And keep going. The next slide. All right. So here's another view of your value proposition. What is the expertise that's very specific for you? So what industries, what products, what is the size of the companies that you've worked at? Have you gotten experience in both public and private companies, life cycle, what life cycles? These are all important parts of the story. If you've never worked in a company that's the size of the company I'm running today, or that's larger, it's going to be hard for me to imagine that you're going to be able to add a lot of strategic value as I think about the future, right? So you're going to have to communicate in such a way that I understand that you've been where I'm trying to go. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. I think we already did this, Paola. It's a little repetitive. There's a couple of opportunities for you to get involved at in my organization at How Women Lead and really build out your work towards getting on a board. So I want you to consider, is it right for you now to really get into creating your getting serious about this board journey? And I would say that the people who are the most successful, and I'll give you an example of my friend Essie Miller. Essie was retiring from a long career in a very senior government role. Well, Essie didn't think that she was going to be able to get on a corporate board, even though someone was encouraging her to think about it because she worked in government. She never worked in a corporation. So she went through our board readiness program at How Women Lead, which is a 5-week course. Then she participated in our Get on Board Week. She was disciplined about getting her bio done. Most people, by the way, you guys, it takes about 9 iterations of your board bio to get done. So it's something where you have to put serious commitment against it. And she just started showing up. Essie showed up to everything we did, including Get on Board Week, which is October 16th through the 20th this year. And within 1 year, she got her first board seat. That's extraordinary. But it's because she probably spent, 5 hours a week disciplined around really working this, including her network. Julie, do you have a sense from your experience of how long it's, how much time people are committed to the networking and the building out their materials and going out and being seen?
I think it really varies, but I do know that there is a core group of women who are really working it.
Yeah.
And we get together and we have lunch or coffee or we chat.
Yeah. Yeah. So and often you call that like a mastermind group, right? A group of people are going to hold you accountable. So you might want to think about, if there's and maybe if people want to raise their hand in the chat or literally, who in this group could be a partner for you that's at the same stage in building out their journey as you, and 5 of you to get together on a regular basis and help each other hold each other accountable, because you're doing something that's new, often a little uncomfortable. It's easy to push it aside to later. And having an accountability partner is super helpful. And we, in our board readiness programs at How Women Lead, we will actually put people into mastermind groups, so they have a group of people that they're partnering with. The other thing that we offer in our organization is a program to get you visible, and you can call it a personal branding program. And that's starting in September. So right now there is we're doing info sessions. So you can find out if it's right for you to start really getting some support on building out all your branding materials and making sure that we can find you, that Google exercise is where you want it to be. Let's keep going, Paula. We have a couple board opportunities that I want you to know about. And if you have any for this group, please let me know. And this is an example of, sometimes we'll get board up. We don't always do a formal board search. Again, majority of board searches are word of mouth. So people will contact us and they're not paying us, but we want to make sure other people know about it. We don't have all the information, so this might be all we know. There's a community bank in Puerto Rico, and then there's another bank called Beacon Bank that are looking for board directors. And you can see here the kinds of expertise that they're looking for. And Paula, who's on my team, is here today, and she can take your, if you're interested and you want to raise your hand, let us know. Or better yet, if you have anybody in your community that you think would be good, always pass the letter back down. All right, let's keep going, Paula.
Julie, would you like to take
I think-
questions?
Yeah,
These are the 2 closing slides for WCS.
Yeah, why don't you pull these down, Paula, and let's have more of a conversation. So there was a comment earlier about the fact that a lot of the well, Jeanette, if you want to chime in. I know there was a comment about women in clean tech, but we can put that in the chat. And Jeanette.
I was typing up something, but I'd rather just ask it. That's easier. The board readiness workshop, does it go into the financial requirements of being on a board? Because I am on a board and do have fiduciary requirements and do not have an MBA or a financial background whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it is my biggest kind of like thing that I'm a
actually-
little nervous about, and I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly.
I actually think that you'd be better off. We have a bunch of different kinds of things that we offer. We have a course that's what you need to know as a board director if you're a non-financial person, and Paula can give you the information about that. We have a lot of sort of those very specific and deep divey programs also in this October Get on Board Week that we offer. So at How Women Lead, I would just say, sign up for, join How Women Lead. Nobody pays anything to join. And all of our programming is either you see it on email or you can see it on our website. So, and I, one of the things that Vidisha was talking about, how she's the financial expert and she's always on the audit committee. That is not required to be on an audit committee. In fact, a lot of people will say that the very best committee for you to be on is audit, because it really gives you an overview of what's going on in the organization. They have, the auditors are the CPAs. You don't have to be a CPA to add value on an audit committee. You need to be a great question asker, though. So. Jeanette, I know it can be intimidating if it's not your area of expertise, but it is, you probably know more than you think you do.
Thanks.
Is usually my experience with people. Anybody else have a question? Leslie, did you raise your hand earlier? I thought. Okay. There was a question earlier about women in clean tech. Do you want to? Pam, do you want to pull that one up? It's kind of buried here.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. There's actually several questions. So let me scroll up to. Yes, so it's from Janavi, and she's saying, it's my observation, majority of sustainability and regenerative initiatives are women-led, and even emerging startups in this area. I'm curious to know, how do we create an environment of acceptance and collaboration and healthy competitions rather than toxic rush of profit-based capitalism we've been experiencing for decades?
I love that question. I don't know. I think this is a group question for all of us. What do you guys think?
And actually, if I would just like to add on to it. So my perspective was as a board member, what is it like, as a role of a board member to direct it in this, area? Like, how do we create that environment as a board member, or is it not the part of,
It is.
what
Oh my
does?
God, of course it is. Okay, this is the thing. ESG, the whole point is if you have great ESG practices early on, a company is going to be more sustainable over its lifetime. And so I think as a board member, it's critical for you to say, listen, short-term gain and long-term pain is not good for this company. Having short-term, financial reward without thinking about the implications over the long haul is not something we should be doing. And I think Julie, I'd encourage you to chime in if you have any thoughts on that. But I think it's a board member's responsibility to say, how are we treating our employees? Because, they may not quit tomorrow, but in 6 months, you could have no employees if you don't do things the right way.
Absolutely. And John V, I'll give you a specific example. One time I was just having kind of you have your routine one-on-ones with the CEO, and we were sitting in his office and we were talking, I raised the issue of, pay equity for women. And I just put the question to him, like, are you tracking this? Are you making sure that your women are being paid the same as men? And he literally turned around and opened up the payroll, whatever program on his computer. And we downloaded the numbers onto an Excel spreadsheet and we looked at it, and he was like, they actually were doing pretty well. But he did notice a couple of women who were in higher positions were falling behind. So absolutely, you should be asking those questions because it made a difference right there.
Right there. Yeah.
And we have our next professional development workshop at the end of September on how to talk about money at work, leveling the playing field for gender pay equity. So feel free to join. September 28th, registration is open on the WCS website, because we're here to help. And we know this is an important skill for every woman to develop.
I
So
would like
we
to
have
just
another. Go ahead. We have one more question. Go ahead. Ask your.
Oh, okay. No, I was
Sarah.
just going to add to that, Julie, with your voice of customer perspective. I think in the era of social media, you can't really hide underneath a rock anymore, because anything you do is going to come out one way or the other. And it has basically long-term consequences to your brand as well if you don't apply those ESGs. I mean, there's so much scrutiny around that now. And companies are being judged who you hire, because there's also like hiring problems as well, the type of talent you want to bring to your company as well. It can have long-term effects if you basically are hiding underneath a rock and have this old school mentality.
Well, people are getting sued left and right too. And there's all kinds of shareholder activism. Like, you need to understand, where's as a board member, risk management is one of the number one things. And it's like our practices, there've been lawsuits against the board because of the CEO compensation that's been outsized. Frequently, actually, that's not a new thing. So, even, if as you're doing your research, like has this company I'm interested in going on the board of ever been sued, and why? But also what are the trends now of shareholder activism? I'm on the board of an investment firm that's all ESG called NIA Capital Management. And NIA is an investor. We're an investor in Tesla, significant investor. Well, Tesla it does some things well, but not everything. And so we aligned with the employees, and we're activists in saying you need to pay people better and address some of these problems that the employees are experiencing. So I think there was one other question. I actually want to comment on the fact that there are a couple people I think, oh, I'm sorry, Pam, I think you said there's questions in here, but Pam, will you make sure that a couple of the women, Agneta, Farah, and Leslie at least get together for a mastermind group? I don't know if anybody else wanted to be part of a mastermind group, but to support each other on your board journey, that'll be great. And we can give you, Paula can give you like a overview of how to manage a mastermind group. So Pam, there was another question.
There's two more questions. So Kelsey is asking, before getting a board seat at a public, larger company, do people typically need to have experience being on a board of a smaller company?
Not really. I mean, if somebody taps you on the shoulder to go on a public company board, and you like the company and it's good, go for it. Now, if you're not, if that's not being presented to you, start your journey, frankly, go all the way back, start your journey getting on a nonprofit board, starting to advise some companies, get on a private company board. And then if you've worked in a public company and you're qualified to be on a public company board, maybe that's a good path for you. But there's all kinds of roads to Rome. And I think a lot of people I know went straight on public company boards. But most of us serve on a nonprofit board from the time we're in our early 30s, right? It's not something that you shouldn't be waiting to add value on a nonprofit board.
Yeah, and I think that we have a range of experience based on our review of the registrants. So early to mid to seasoned professionals. So there may be an early person that's thinking, where do I start? So wonderful advice. So Maria Paula has asked, very cool and flattering to get invited to be part of a board. What's the best way to start and drive or find that opportunity other than networking? Do I look for board seats, kind of like looking for a job? Sorry for the basic question, but I think it's a great question. So where do they start?
Fantastic.
Is it like looking for a job?
It's not really like looking for a job. And Julie, chime in. But what I would say is, it's really networking. So I'm sorry. If you want to try and stay, I think someone's going to come knock on your door without you putting yourself out there. It's not going to happen. But there's some things you can do to actually narrow your networking. Certainly, you can go to, it's public information on public boards anyway, who's on a board and when their terms are up. So if you know that, you can contact, you can build relationships with people on that board and say, I think I'd be great for this board seat that'll be coming up. The truth is, building relationships today and networking is the number one way. We can give you, and we do this in our board readiness program, we can give you lists of make sure you're on if you want to get a European board seat, here is a search practice or a list that they put out there for potential people to get board seats in European companies. There's, a dozen of those. If anybody asks you to pay $20,000 and they're going to guarantee you a board seat, run. They want your money. They're not going to get you a board seat. Julie, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I'll say the networking is really critical. But I'm going to ask you a question, Julie C. and Julie A. Right? Is how do you recommend that people actually say, I am looking for a board seat?
Yeah, literally that. Narrower the better. So, I've been looking, think about if I came to you and I said, hey, listen, I'm a venture capitalist and I've invested in 6 different climate related companies, and a couple of them have really grown to, a significant size, like Series D. I've, been an advisor to them all these years. I would like to go on the board of a Series C climate focused company, and I can both bring venture capitalists to the table because I have a massive network, but I can also serve in a capacity of bringing great talent to that board. So right there, that's very narrow, and you'd know what to do with me, I think. What do you think, Julie? With that sort of
Yeah. And I'd say too, don't be bashful about reaching out directly to the CEO of a company. It's really stunning how they will respond on LinkedIn for a 15-minute, 30-minute phone call.
Be
Yeah.
very narrow and specific. Not a long, not 5 paragraphs. Is how I would suggest it. And you literally think like, okay, this is the other thing. What service providers have you worked with? You know, EY, Deloitte, law firms, they're often getting tapped, not only to find board members, but especially pre-IPO companies. A lot of them will call me in a panic. You know, we're going public in 6 months. Find me someone quick.
So I just adore this conversation, but we do have 2 minutes left. I
Okay.
want to make sure we end on time. Is
have a
there
couple
any
slides?
burning questions left from, I see no more in the chat, but is there any burning questions that someone would like to open their mic briefly? And then we'll jump to a couple of quick closing slides. And, you know, Julie, you've been so gracious, as well as our Aurora Solar folks, and Vidisha and Julie Bush for our special guests. So allow me to remind folks of the upcoming events. And we're delighted to say these are open for registration. Hit up the Women in Cleantech and Sustainability.org website and make sure that you continue to attend. We're excited to have opportunities for you to return to our programming. And the final slide is to remind us of WCS's virtual social media platforms. So here are our handles. Make sure that we get the connection into following us and learning more about our programs and services. And the final slide is really to extend a huge thank you to Julie Castro Abrams, her team that's put this together, Aurora Solar for our sponsor, as well as Vidisha Prasad and Julie Bush for our special guest executives to share their board journey story. So I want to thank all of you for participating today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you again. Be well, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future programs. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.